Tonight, as Tara mentioned, my name is Kai Henning. I'm the Deputy Consul General here in New York, and I'd like to welcome you all to the German House. I will be very brief because we have a long, eventful evening ahead of us. And the German House is really very excited to host the 7th Human Impact Salon in a series of partnership events with the Human Impact Institute that you had with the Embassy and also with the Consulate over the last years. And yeah, population, food and water, poverty, energy, and of course climate change. These are the global challenges of the future. And tonight we will focus especially on climate, but maybe we also touch upon some other of these issues. I had the pleasure to participate already in some other events organized by the Human Impact Institute, and therefore I can promise you that we will have an unusual, exciting, entertaining and also very informative event tonight. And we will talk about issues that concern us all. And therefore, again, a very warm welcome to all of you. And I'd like to also pass the microphone to my colleague Roberto from the Italian Embassy, who's co-hosting this event with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kai. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for being here tonight to take a part to an event that I hope will represent an important and useful occasion to increase knowledge, share experience, discuss and promote collaboration on fundamental matters such as the environment and all that is connected with it, from energy politics to sustainable development to, in particular tonight, the climate change. I would like to thank especially my colleague and dear friend, the Deputy Consul General of the German Consulate, Kai Henning, for proposing me some months ago to co-sponsor this initiative at this place where I always come with pleasure, the German House. Naturally, thank Tara Deporte and her organization, the Human Impact Institute. She, from the beginning, I have to say, have transmitted to us enthusiasm and passion with which they deal matters that touch so close the well-being of all of us and of the generations to come, toward whom we have a responsibility of action and commitment. As you know, this semester Italy is holding the presidency of the Council of the European Union, and in this regard I'm happy to announce, some of you already know, that an agreement has been reached within the European Council last week on the so-called Energy 2030 Climate Framework. It is an ambitious and well-balanced agreement that confirms the European leadership in the fight against climate changes. The member states of the European Union set themselves 3 targets: a collective reduction of at least 40% in greenhouse gas emissions, a European objective of a share for renewable energy of at least 27% of total EU energy consumption, and an indicative objective of at least 27% improvement in energy efficiency by 2030. As Presidency of the Council of the EU, Italy has strived to reach such agreement that was one of the most qualifying objectives of our program. The safeguard of the environment and the fight against climate change are reached obviously by the actions of government, but should also be done through a campaign for the awareness of the civil society and through the conscience of every citizen. For this reason, initiatives such as this tonight, which propose to create a partnership between stakeholders even very different and utilize new programs and new forms of efficient communication, could be particularly helpful. My personal greetings to all the panelists who have accepted to be present tonight, including the colleagues like our Italian and German colleagues who have come from Washington DC tonight to be here, and to the artists that will cheer up with their performance, I'm sure. I wish a nice evening to all of you.
Our wonderful opening inspirational musical guests, Bethany and Rufus, weren't feeling well, so they weren't able to join us. But we have a wonderful special guest, Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul and Mary, who I cannot think of a better person to start off a conversation about collaboration and really doing action for the good of our planet. So Peter, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Okay, all right, that's good.
We don't have a,
No, no.
we don't have a
What Tara did not indicate was that Bethany Yarrow is my daughter. So I called her up and I said, do you think they'll accept me in your place? And it is unusual for me to be subbing. She does sub for me from time to time, but we are very much locked into a very focused effort. She is totally dedicated to climate sanity, to avoidance of cataclysmic climate change, and she's become, no surprise, a terrific organizer. Her mother was Gene McCarthy's niece, is Gene McCarthy's niece, and we met campaigning for him. And that tradition has carried through in her. She's hugely involved in an anti-fractivist point of view, but on a much broader basis, and also very connected to restorative justice for indigenous people, particularly First Nations. Now, my history with the climate movement goes back to the first international effort that absorbed all of us, which was the anti-nuke movement, when we had the audacity to think that there was a danger, you know, and there was such irresponsibility at the time. This was pre-Chernobyl, pre-Three Mile Island, pre-Fukushima. And we are facing that exact kind of dilemma. And interestingly enough, and I'm going to sing you a song, and then I have to leave because I'm subbing for my daughter and I have another commitment. But this was the anthem of that, written by John Hall and Johanna Hall, his wife. And he was a member of a band called Orleans. And he and Bonnie Raitt and Jackson Browne took a very important role in this effort to stop the creation of new nuclear power plants, because it was very, very clear that some of them, one at Diablo Canyon was built right on top of an earthquake site. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So, now the first verse he wrote, with Johanna Hall, and the chorus. And I'll update it a little in the chorus. But the second verse I wrote with Paul and Mary, and it is apt now. It says, we are only now beginning to see how delicate the balance of nature can be. The limits of her ways have been defined, and we've crossed that line. This was way back in the 1970s. Some don't even care or know that we'll pay, but we have seen the face of death in our day. There's so little time to change our ways. If only we together can say, and the chorus says, just give me the warm power of the sun. Give me the steady flow of a waterfall. Give me the spirit of living things as they return to clay. Just give me the restless power of the wind. Give me the comforting glow of a wood fire, which is not exactly the most, certainly not a coal burning, but please keep all of that atomic, take all of that atomic poison power away. So now we would say, take all of that poison fracking power, all of that fossil fuel poison power away, and I'm going to sing it for you, and we will then, therefore, have a moment of history to share, okay? It's not rhetorical, is that okay? Peter, Paul, and Mary did record this. Just give me the warm power of the sun. Give me the steady flow of a waterfall. Give me the spirit of living things as they return to clay. Just give me the restless power of the wind. Give me the comforting glow of a wood fire. But please take all of your atomic poison power away. Everybody needs some power, I'm told, to keep them from the darkness and the cold. Some may see a way to take control when it's bought and sold. I know that lives are at stake, yours and mine and our descendants in time. There's so much to gain, so much to lose. Every one of us has to choose. Everybody. No, you can just go like this. Just give me the warm power of the sun. Give me the steady flow of a waterfall. Give me the spirit of living things as they return to clay. Just give me the restless power of the wind. Give me the comforting glow of a wood fire. But please take all of your atomic poison power away. We are only now beginning to see how delicate the balance of nature can be. The limits of her ways have been defined, and we've crossed that line. Some don't even care or know that we'll pay. But we have seen the face of death in our day. There's so little time to change our ways. If only we together can say, just give me the warm power of the sun. Give me the steady flow of a waterfall. Give me the spirit of living things as they return to clay. Just give me the restless power of the wind. Give me the comforting glow of a wood fire. But please take all of your atomic poison power, all of your poison power, all of your fossil fuel poison power away.
I think we can all go home. I think we're done, right? All right, that's a hard act to follow. Thank you so much, Peter. That was amazing. So if your name's up on the board, please come up. If you recognize yourself, come on up. So really quickly, again, my name is Tara DePort from the Human Impacts Institute, and we have some amazing people up here and more to follow that don't really know what we're about to do. So they're as curious as you are. And to just start it off, we have Marquise Stillwell, who's principal of Open Box, sitting right next to me. And then we have Sabina Marks over there, actually, you can probably tell from the picture, managing director of the Center for Research on Environmental Decisions at Columbia University. And then we have Brian Merchant in the middle, who makes that face often, I'm told, who's the senior editor for Motherboard at Vice Media. And just to give you a little bit of an idea, in these salons, we don't have any presentations going on. We're going to have a conversation, and they actually don't know the questions that they're going to be asked yet. So we don't know what's going to happen yet, and you're as much a part of this exploration of really looking at how can we collaborate for climate action? How can we work better together? And I think starting with singing together When's the last time you started clapping and snapping at a panel discussion with the group? I think we started off on a good note. So for the other one, you might want to scooch a little bit closer to me, and you're a little bit closer to her so you don't hurt your neck, because we're going to have a video to start us off to get us inspired for our first question.
So ladies and gentlemen, at TED we talk a lot about leadership and how to make a movement. So let's watch a movement happen, start to finish, in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons from it. First, of course you know, a leader needs the guts to stand out and be ridiculed. But what he's doing is so easy to follow. So here's his first follower with a crucial role. He's going to show everyone else how to follow. Now notice that the leader embraces him as an equal. So now it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Now there he is calling to his friends. Now if you notice that the first follower is actually an underestimated form of leadership in itself. It takes guts to stand out like that. The first follower is what transforms a lone nut into a leader. And here comes a second follower. Now it's not a lone nut, it's not two nuts, 3 is a crowd, and a crowd is news. So a movement must be public. It's important to show not just the leader, but the followers, because you find that new followers emulate the followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, and immediately after, 3 more people. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point. Now we've got a movement. So notice that as more people join in, it's less risky. So those that were sitting on the fence before now have no reason not to. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, but they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. So over the next minute, you'll see all of the those that prefer to stick with the crowd, because eventually they would be ridiculed for not joining in. And that's how you make a movement. But let's recap some lessons from this. So first, if you are the type, like the shirtless dancing guy, that is standing alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals. So it's clearly about the movement, not you. Okay, but we might have missed the real lesson here. The biggest lesson, if you noticed, did you catch it? Is that leadership is over-glorified. That yes, it was the shirtless guy was first, and he'll get all the credit, but it was really the first follower that transformed the lone nut into a leader. So as we're told that we should all be leaders, that would be really ineffective. If you really care about starting a movement, have the courage to follow and show others how to follow. And when you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first one to stand up and join in. And what a perfect place to do that at TED. Thanks.
Marquise, I'm actually going to come to you first, because I hear you're really good at finding lone nuts out there. And we have a question that I'm going to ask you in terms of how, or do we, balance leadership and collaboration? And when you and I had talked earlier, you talked a little bit about something about cloud thinking and kind of being a little bit wary of that. So I'm wondering if we have a little pretty cloud up there in a shape of, it's a Rorschach test of sorts, so whatever you see in it means something about you. But what do you think? This idea of leadership and collaboration. Can I actually ask you? I never give up my mic.
All right, it's a good question. What I believe that's best when it comes to leadership and collaboration is this idea of moving away from this idea of empathy and then really moving to empowerment. Empathy is this idea of just relatability, which is fine and it's great for a lot of the work that we do, but really if you want to create this great collaboration, you have to empower people so that they bring who they are as well. One thing that I enjoyed about this little exercise that we just watched was that not everyone needed to mimic him to be a part of the group. And I think too many times leaders are asking for people to mimic them, and instead really empower them to be themselves, which is to me true collaboration.
And Sabina, I think I have something for you, a good follow-up, and we'll bring up this next idea, which I think will look familiar to you and the work you do about environmental decision-making. But when we're talking about leadership and collaboration, there's something about kind of knowing who's in the room. Can you talk a little bit more towards that?
Is this on?
You have to press on. You have to push it up. When the green button is on, it's on.
Thank you. I'm a social scientist. So I actually should have done a little survey of the audience who's here tonight so I can tailor my message or the information, my insights to this audience. But I assume that everybody here is already interested in collaboration and in climate change. We didn't pick everybody up outside on the street and brought you in here. So when I saw the video, I just thought this contradicts some of my underlying concepts underlying a lot of our research, is that you need to identify a trusted messenger and a trusted leader, and then people will follow. Now, this guy was a random guy and had no other relationship with the participants. There was no pre-existing trust in this guy, and people who trusted this guy knows what he's doing. This was very spontaneous. So I'm surprised to see how well this worked. But I still think what he did would probably not work here. So I will not try to say what he was doing here. Well, Peter Yarrow made us snap and clap. But I think in order for a leader to be successful, he or she needs to employ what we call a participatory process, to engage people at the level that matters to them. And clearly, with or without knowing, the leader in this video touched something in people, the dance, the moves, but allowed them to create their own version of it. And I think that's what Marquis just pointed out. I think is very useful. So tailoring, knowing what your audience wants and not doing a top-down approach, and engage your collaborators as early as possible, rather than late in the game when you have already come up with a project, you have implemented it and it failed, and then you say, oh, I should have engaged some other people in it, and now let them help me find out what went wrong. So the early engagement in a participatory process.
And I'm going to come to you. I actually have another question that you perfectly brought up, something I want to bring over to Brian. My next question for you, Brian, is speaking a little bit to what you had said, is you have to touch people in some way. So Brian, I'm wondering for you, how can communication change the way we work together? And the next slide is something I took from a conversation with you, and it's exactly what Sabina just said. She says, move me. So I'm wondering, how do we move people on climate? How does communication change the way we might collaborate on an issue like climate?
Well, I mean, there are many, many ways. I think that if I had the answer to that, I would be able to charge exorbitant consulting fees at green conferences around the country. But it's different, and that some iteration of that question comes up all the time. Oh, you're a climate communicator. What do you do that works? Like, what do people respond to? And there are people that say, oh, people need to know how bad it is. And no, people get sick of apocalyptic messaging. And oh, people want solutions. And I really can't say that I've ever identified a single thread that stands out more than others. Personally, I do tend to find that people get worried and can be activated in that state, and that we do get a lot of response to articles that remind people rather forcefully how bad things can be, and that can be a foundation layer for collaboration. It doesn't have to be a sort of an annihilating state, but people do kind of respond to how bad things are. Can I respond real quick to that video? Because that
Sure.
So it's a great video, and but I don't know how useful of an example it is for how leadership develops, because we are in kind of a vacuum, right? We're at a music festival where it's a weirdo-friendly environment, right? People are, on all kinds of, experience modifiers, music's blasting, and the guy's wiggling around, and he's having a great time, and people decide to emulate him. In a real-world environment, and if we're using climate as our analog in this case, that weirdo would be somebody standing up to a fracking company, or somebody, in a community who would be kind of like the weirdo's the guy with the picket sign. And outside of that vacuum are all kinds of moneyed forces kind of helping to paint him as not the kind of weirdo that you want to dance with, but the kind that you want to cross the street to avoid.
Yeah. Marquise, maybe you have something to add to that and this idea of moving people?
I think that just to continue with his response, I believe what's key to communication is first initial access, and access for the use of self, right? I think sometimes that we believe at the institutional level, everyone needs to have access to this idea of transparency and information, but useful information allows me to make decisions about how I live my life in a daily way, and me as an individual, the impact that I have each day, right? And what has happened is that the information that is necessary for me to make decision, it's been denied. It's been denied at certain, definitely socioeconomic levels that have the greatest impact, right? So we've learned that lesson during Sandy, we certainly learned that lesson during Katrina, where the people who needed it the most were actually affected the worst, and they didn't have this access to information. But if you look during that time, there were people that you would have never thought were leaders that came out of tragedies like Sandy and Katrina. And I do believe that it wasn't a lack of information, it was this something inside of them that told them to respond. And when you're pushed up against your life and it's real life, I do believe that you don't need music, you don't need any altering, anything that you're taking during a musical concert to actually activate something inside of you to do something.
And that's a perfect kind of intro to a next question for Sabina. I think you'll be very familiar with the next image coming up, and this idea of communicating both information, but also this idea of responding to fear. So can you tell us a little bit more about what this exactly is talking about and how that relates to what these two gentlemen just said?
Yes, so actually I think in this case, I mean, like we saw leadership in the context of Sandy or Katrina, and that was an immediate response to crisis. And when we're in crisis mode, we become active. It's a wellspring for action, and our decisions, we don't elaborate on our decisions, we respond. And that's when communities come together. We always hear these wonderful stories during the blackout in 2003, during Katrina, during Sandy, how communities come together and help, and how leadership evolves and people follow and take action. Now, when we're faced with the potential of another Sandy hitting us, or the potential of sea level rise, down the road, sometime in the future, we don't have that same response as we have when we're immediately facing it. And that's something we become myopic, we become short-sighted, we cannot wrap our minds around what it means, what sea level rise means in 50 years and 100 years for the New York borderline. So what this illustration shows is basically what makes you jump, what gives you nightmares, and for some people, we need an emotional trigger for people to start to pay attention, and then they might open up to acknowledging more scientific information and starting to absorb it and starting to think about what they can do in order to prepare. But it's a huge hurdle psychologically, cognitively, mentally to wrap our minds around future threats.
Great, and I'm going to get to you in a minute, so remember what you're about to say. We're going to jump a little bit because I want to pull in, you know, we mentioned Sandy and we mentioned some other events that have happened, and here's an example of people responding directly to these issues, and I think you'll be very familiar with some of these things going on.
The climate change is, I'm one of the first victims. You know, we've got the people who live in the southern hemisphere and the very far north, and the wildlife that live there. We're the first people who are experiencing global warming at its intense level.
We are in Battery Park in New York City. This is where Flood Wall Street is gathering. There's a direct action later today. And there are some people speaking up there right now. We're going to go try and speak to some of them.
My community is under climate attacks. The time to act is now.
This means revolution.
Yesterday? Is everybody ready to step it up today?
Vested interests that are winning so much from inaction and even have plans to profit from the climate crisis and are already enacting them. And that's what we can't afford.
Mm-hmm. And that makes the fight that much harder, right? You're trying to change an entire system, not just specific issues, and in your book you talk about really changing ideology. That seems like a huge task. Where do we start doing
that?
Well,
I think it helps to actually name what you're up against, and I think what gives me hope is, you know, this is almost 3 years to the day since Occupy Wall Street, and a lot of the people here today were involved in that action, that moment, that process. And at the time, climate change wasn't on the agenda for the movement. In fact, like Occupy Wall Street came up with a document that listed everything that was wrong with Wall Street and wrong with capitalism, and climate change wasn't on the list. This is a system that isn't just foreclosing on people's individual homes, it's foreclosing on our collective home. What I think is exciting about this moment is you have all these sort of rivers of activism coming together. And you know, this amazingly sort of symbolic to be having this gathering by the water and to have the imagery of water reminding people that in fact Wall Street was actually flooded, and that didn't seem to wake them up, so they clearly need a little bit more.
But I think this is very much related to the first video we saw in some ways. To some, when they see the actions like that, they'll say that they're to them like the crazy guy in the field at the music festival. And so the question I have for you, Brian, is where are some of these the most exciting collaborations taking place? You had talked about things like Flood Wall Street when we talked earlier. What do you think? Where are these exciting collaborations happening?
Yeah, these are happening all over the place. The People's Climate March is a great example, probably the most thunderous and sort of the most emphatic example of this coming together. And in a lot of ways, Flood Wall Street, People's Climate March, and all these sort of modern-day iterations of the protest march kind of were foregrounded by Occupy Wall Street. And that, to me, is kind of like the ultimate sort of vehicle for collaboration that we need to see more of, is sort of spontaneous, community-level, focused, or unfocused in some cases, activism, where people have a space. I think public space is really important in that. And the legacy of Occupy Wall Street is in Flood Wall Street, is in Occupy Sandy, and even to some extent the People's Climate March, because a lot of people kind of assume that it's faded away, but what it did is it activated a lot of cells, different groups that are interested in different areas, in fracking, or in climate change in particular. 350.org was on board. And so when something like Sandy happens, you have sort of a casual sort of organizational system that's ready to spring into effect. And that's now what we're seeing, is a lot of those have kind of hardened into more effective, more pointed, politically, viable operations.
Great, and a little bit later we're going to get into looking at more of the policy component and then tie it all together. But Marquise, I want to bring it over over to you, there are a couple of images that are kind of come up that I hope are very familiar to you up there. And I'm curious, when we had talked before, these were some examples of things that you thought were some pretty amazing collaborations. So where do you think some of the most exciting collaborations are taking place?
Should I say what that is or no?
You certainly can, yeah. I'm sure they're dying with curiosity.
So I'm part of a project called the Low Line. Images from the Low Line. It's the underground park that I'm collaborating with and building it on the Lower East Side at Delancey, Essex. And our conversation around collaboration really stemmed around some of the ideas that we're doing with this project. And that's really working closely with the community and empowering the community to also be a part of the project. Not waiting till the project is built and then trying to bring the community in. I believe that some of the major problems with collaboration and some of the challenges I even have with Occupy Wall Street and others is that these are 3 to, I wouldn't even say decades late reaction to the people that were most affected. And then you see the people who actually helped cause the problem protesting against the problem. And it's the same faces over and over again. And so it's really hard for someone like myself or other people that come from certain backgrounds to really believe that action is going to actually happen. And what we're really trying to do is bring those young kids, Dominican kids, the young Asian kids, the community of people that are really being affected down on the Lower East Side and giving them a voice to be a part of the project and not waiting to the end to collaborate with them. And so that's where we've been really working hard to activate.
Sabina, do you maybe have a bit to add to either of these points or to this idea? In your opinion, where's some of the most exciting collaboration for climate taking place? Where's it happening?
Actually, just speaking to the examples that we just saw, I mean, the Flood Wall Street, the Climate March, and the Low Line. I think the Low Line is an excellent example of linking to the real problems in the neighborhood that may not be verbalized as climate change, but they can be linked to climate change. It may be access to housing, it may be access to healthy food, it may be access to good schools, to after-school programs, and addressing youth, elderly, residents, people who work in the area, including all of them to make it their project. Let them help identify the problems that we may not even know about as the scientist, as the urban planner, or whatever our occupation is, and let them help identify the solutions, because they have a wealth of solutions available that can be brought out, because they know what's within their capacity. We can come up with solutions that may not fall into my own individual decision authority, and then it's not actually a viable solution for me. So helping, letting the audience, the participants, the community help identify the solutions, you'll be in much more compliance with any solutions that you're trying to implement. And to speak about, I think the Climate March, I think it was very successful in bringing a wide range of people together, from Bill de Blasio to I think insurance companies, businesses, scientists, typical environmental activists. So you had this huge participation from many, many different aspects of urban living that brought attention to what they to climate change from their perspective. Whereas I think with the Flood Wall Street, I can't applaud people enough for the stamina that people had in Occupy and in Flood Wall Street to still be out there. But they are alienating probably the audience that they're trying to reach. So how do we bring big business, Wall Street, finance into the picture? How do we speak their language so that they come to the table rather than attacking? And that's something in terms of communication that's one of the biggest sectors that we need to engage, where we need to speak their language and present it as a win-win to them as well.
A quick one? Yeah?
Yeah. Well, I want to say sometimes that
attacking can, serve a unifying purpose, right? You can collaborate in order to. One of the reasons that Occupy Wall Street had such staying power was that there was a common enemy. It was Wall Street. Wall Street had just enacted this terrible economic downturn. It took its root there, and everybody could kind of agree that they were against that. And I also agree. I think that the climate march was incredibly diverse. I marched alongside of Bangladeshi lawyers and workers from the Bronx, people from the SEIU, unions, and farmers, people from all over the country, people from all different walks of life. And I think that was a great victory of how diverse it was. And I think that it's important because it's building power, and that's ultimately what we need to do above all else, is build power, enough power to enact the policy changes that we need to see.
What a segue to the policy section. Thank you, Brian. So what we're going to do now is you guys are going to come back up in a little bit. You're going to get a break and get to watch. But you guys now have to do a little bit of work, because you always have to do work at a salon. So that's a great intro to our challenge for you, which we're going to pull up here. There's a little example of the Climate March if you haven't seen all those images. But now it's your turn to really think about this idea of collaborating for climate change. You're going to have 5 minutes. We're going to put a timer up, so you're going to feel very pressed for time. And what I'm asking of you is, what will you do to collaborate on climate? So what will you do? What are you going to do? And your challenge in 5 minutes is to both share with a person you don't know near you, stay in your seats, because it's really hard to get you back in them, and share outside of the room. So whether it has to be a short phone call, or a tweet, or an Instagram post, or whatever. Because a big part of what we're talking about is, if we keep talking amongst ourselves, there's only but so much we can do. So we have to get it outside of this room. So you have 5 minutes. All of us, yes, and the hashtag is coming up in a minute, don't worry. Good question. So 5 minutes, what will you do to collaborate on climate? To both share with someone in the room that you don't know and share outside of the room. And the hashtag is climate collaboration, if you're doing Twitter or any of the other social media, all right? Are you guys ready? Yes, we're gonna turn the lights up. You guys have to do it too. On your mark. You ready, Liam? Get set? Go.
I'm just gonna read a little poem on the matter at hand. My name is Nick. People call me Nipples, yada, yada, yada. Either or. All right, this goes. Brother, my brother, sister, my lover, and our quest for each other, it seems we've forgotten mother. And we chill like it's cool as the temperature boils, and the rich hand laugh while the broken hand toils. And can the farm hand last with no land, in the land with no soil? Is a poor man royal if he digs and strikes oil? I think not, but you still got your ski trips and long showers on the weekend. Look, brother, my brother, sister, my lover, and our hate for each other, it seems we forgotten mother. And though she heals with a slow hand, we kill with a fast one. A fervor for murder, I fear become a passion. Flesh of my flesh, kin of my energy, could it be there's no more fruit in the forbidden tree? Sickens me to see how we have no empathy for chemistry that nurtured us from nothing into a sentient entity. But at least you still got your ski trips and long showers on the weekends. Now correct me if I'm wrong, but everyone loves a long shower, except maybe the Philippines, whose showers come with gale force winds at hundreds of miles an hour from random erratic cold fronts. And we just give cold shoulders, forgetting the whole world was cold once. Our long showers may ease our chakra and sutra, but in Bangladesh it swells the Ganges and Brahmaputra, and the flooding that occurs is needed in Johannesburg. Chad, Sudan, and Iran, where water is pretty scarce. Shit, it's bad news, but it definitely can't get worse. But that's only if we stop and we decide not to act first. But you might still have your ski trips and long showers on the weekend. Look, brother, my brother, sister, my lover, in our space from what matters, it seems we forgotten mother. Water warfare in Detroit and Chicago, mass floods and mudslides in Colorado, droughts from Cali to Malawi, snowstorms in Atlanta, that's like Santa living in Maui. Agricultural practices that are ass backwards and carried out with an air of totalitarian arrogance. It's safe to assume baby booms are given room, perhaps by the sheer amount of food that we consume. Nitrates in the fertilizer, methane from the cattle, avalanches being caused from an uphill battle, but shit, you might still have your ski trips and long showers on the weekend. See, this topic was the butt of media jokes in '93, covered by the hard-hitting journalists at MTV. Clean energy replaced with a push to buy like 10 CDs. 10 plastic polluted years later, we got MP3s. We took this as an empty threat until eventually East Asian tuna vessels are fishing an empty sea. Fuck with that right now, I'm sorry. Use your sensory and try to get a glimpse of these futures if we think that we can actually exist for free. Because you won't have your long showers on the weekend and you could deep six your ski trip. Sister, my sister, children, my future. Rather than sell you hope, I present you a solution. Reevaluation of your Terran education. Reintegration with nature to end all this segregation. Retool the preschools that breed fools whose main concern is, that's rocking, he's hot and she's cool. Shit. Rethink what you know. Realize what you grow might be good to eat, but not good for the ecosystem. And remember, your imprint in CO is just like BO. It lingers, and we know. In mass, it's lethal. Next thing you know, greenhouse gases will gas us, and you're gonna have to terraform just to live in Kansas. And that'll be the end of your ski trips and long showers on the weekend. Thank you.
My first really simple question for you guys is, what does effective partnership for climate really look like? And Tracy, I'm going to come over to you because you have quite a bit of experience in both progressing on climate, but also probably a few step backs. And we have a little image I thought might bring up a little ideas for you. I think neon lighting helps with everything. So we talked a little bit about this idea of kind of like being open to diverse partnerships. So when you think of what does effective climate partnership look like, can you tell us a little bit?
Thanks. It's hard not to go into the negotiation realm following that, but I think there's effective partnership in the negotiations, which congratulations to the EU for leading on 40% this last week. Because I think that actually, and being the leader in that area is very important. But in the negotiations, it's a whole other flavor. I think that we could go there if we want to, but I think impact in the field is another story, and we touched on that earlier. A lot of it depends on early buy-in of the partners that are across the sectors, including at the community level, industry, government, etc. I think it's quite important to make sure that everyone knows what the objective is, and in this case, of course, it's reduced emissions or adaptation, etc. Early on in the process. The summit brought together a lot of innovative partnerships that I'm actually, since this is rather participatory, how many are familiar with the climate summit that just happened about a month ago? Okay, so virtually everybody. There were over 100 heads of state there, over 300 partners from other sectors that came forward with a good handful of partnerships. Some of them were innovative. This sounds like I'm quite loud. I hope I'm not shouting anybody's eardrums off, but innovative in that they brought together industry leaders who were not normal joiners. They weren't part of the clubs, the World Economic Forum, etc., but they were industry leaders, McDonald's, Walmart, Kellogg's, Nestle, etc., that came forward in a climate, no pun intended, that was a little bit risky for them. And I think why they were willing to do that is there was some coverage. I think I was kind of looking for this to come out earlier. You know, what that video showed was that you need to diminish the risk for partnerships to come forward as well. So the early leaders often take the brunt, and then it allows for others to come forward. And at the summit provided a little bit of coverage because it was en masse in some degree, so we got some good partnerships.
Yeah, it was later in the concert when there was a big group there, right?
Exactly.
And Georg, I want to come over to you, because when we had talked a little bit about this, I think a couple of these images that come up will be familiar to you. You talked about something like concrete examples being really important in terms of effective collaborations. You have to steal her microphone. So I have a couple examples. One from Germany up top, this like magical city in Germany. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that's producing over 300 times the energy they need for their village. And then this is an example of a building in the U.S. that you had talked about as well. So can you tell us a little bit about that? What does effective partnership look like?
Right, so the first example would be like we have a lot of energy cooperatives, that's what we call them, or energy communities. And when they started, they were just like on our first video, the Lonely Dances, or what we call the Lonely Nuts. And many things didn't work, like, you know, the first windmill didn't work, it collapsed, for instance, and people said, well, this is not possible in Germany, maximum 3% or so. But then there were people who believed that they could do it, they could develop this kind of energy, first of all, and then they could do more, and then there were enthusiasts to produce their own energy, and so the energy cooperatives and communities developed, and now we have almost 1,000 in Germany. And in terms of cooperation, they do a lot of cooperation, particularly with communities over here, and then they exchange their experiences because they have to, you know, they have a lot to tell each other, and that is very exciting. And this example is also very exciting. I had the chance to visit the office building of the NREL, the National Renewable Laboratory in Colorado, and they built an office building which everybody who works in a typical US office would love to work in because it's quiet, it's good air, it's light, it's nice temperature, you can open the windows if you want, and they use only a fraction of the energy which you usually use, and they don't have the noise of an AC and everything. And they produce more energy than they consume, and it's fascinating. And they build it in average cost of an office building, and that is really convincing, I would say. So there are examples out there, and if you communicate these examples, I think people will follow.
And I'd like to come over to you too, because you work a lot on the scientific component, and one of the things that you do a lot of is really helping also make connections between cities. So in the next slide we have, again, some neon colors to get us going, if we can get to it. Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about this idea of science and connecting and sharing, particularly across our cities, and how that might be an example of partnership?
So thanks a lot for your question. I would like to give the perspective from a guy that's in Washington and is dealing with the federal government in Washington. We as Europeans, we are trying to have a joint approach with some specific agencies. Sometimes not so easy. So what we were trying to do during also our presidency is to have this harmonized approach among the different science and technology people that are in our group, and understand which are the different initiatives that are going on the bilateral level, and try to be more harmonized. Because when we're trying to I mean, Europe is a very unique country, let's say, because at the end we are, especially in the US, we are competing, but we need also to collaborate with each other. So the idea is to have a common understanding what we are doing with our US counterpart, and find a common understanding where we can try really to build stronger partnership as Europeans together. So really try to have a bottom-up initiative that's able to empower the initiative that we have on the bilateral level. So just going back in terms of the policy, as you might know, in Europe we have this smart specialization policy that is coming also, that is pushed very strongly to the different member states. Italy has improved and invested in the smart city cluster in order to have different cities being working on this topic heavily. So we were trying to really, as different Europeans around these groups on the science, to understanding how we are approaching the different, some agencies like DOE, the National Institute of Science and Technology, Standard Technology, the small business, and also the National Science Foundation have a common understanding where we can bring joint mechanisms in order to have different communities that are in Europe working a better way with at the same communities that are in the US. So I think that is a starting process. The idea is to use our Horizon 2020 mechanism that is a very, very large funding mechanism that we have in Europe. Is about $100 billion in the next 7 years, and to really try to to better understand the needs that we have in Europe and interface with the one that we have with our counterpart in the US.
Great, great. So these are, very different, some very concrete examples, and being open, you're also talking a lot to what Tracy was saying in terms of just very different people coming together to work on this issue together. So before our next question, we actually have another video that talks a little bit about this, again, coming back to this, like how on earth do we get all these different countries and different sectors to work together? So here's another slightly humorous video about that.
How can countries tackle climate change and mitigate the negative consequences of global warming? The world's political leaders frequently meet at climate summits for intense talks to discuss this question. Typically, however, climate talks end with limited agreements that are merely declarations of intent. In fact, most climate summits end without any agreement.
No, we can't.
What will it take for countries to reach agreement on an effective climate treaty? Clearly, political leaders will not sign onto agreements that are unpopular. And even if they did, only an agreement with broad public support across countries stands a chance at actually being implemented. In many countries, the public debate focuses on the question of how popular climate policy is among citizens in general. This debate misses the point that one's opinion on climate agreements is not different from one's opinion on buying a new car. Demand for climate treaties depends on the costs and features of an agreement, just like demand for a car depends on its price and options. To find out which features of an agreement are more or less important to the public, we carried out online survey experiments on representative samples of 8,500 citizens in the United States, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. Support for a climate treaty depends strongly on the agreement's cost. An increase in the costs of a climate treaty from 0.5% to 1% of gross domestic product decreases public support by 10 percentage points. However, governments can make global climate pacts more attractive by adding features that the public values in an agreement, much like the effect of those attractive options in a desirable but pricey car. Our research suggests that the public values 3 features of a climate agreement: the distribution of costs, participation, and enforcement. For example, agreements find more support if they distribute the costs across countries such that they resonate with prominent fairness norms. An example is the polluter pays principle, which requires that countries with higher greenhouse gas emissions have to carry a larger share of the costs. Similarly, negotiators can design more attractive agreements by including many countries, by creating an independent monitoring body to keep track of whether countries are meeting their emission targets, and by employing small sanctions for countries that miss their obligations. Although the general level of support for global climate policy is higher in European countries than in the United States, our research shows that publics in all 4 countries have very similar opinions about which features of climate agreements are desirable. This means that, at least in relatively wealthy democracies, leaders face similar political demands. Therefore, policymakers, like automobile manufacturers attracting new consumers, need to innovate and compose a treaty at the right price with the right features that attracts majority support in countries around the world.
Have some interesting talking points, and particularly of how can we make progress on climate policy. And I wanted to bring up a little cartoon, and I'm going to open this up. Maybe Tracy, you look a little bit on the edge of your seat, so I think I'm going to come to you first. How can we make progress in climate policy? And if we can bring up the little cartoon, this actually has the climate summit on here, and something that we're probably familiar with in the US is someone saying something like, well, what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? So, and then you see this whole long list of all these things that we could potentially come out of this, you know, in terms of jobs and greener cities and great stuff. So, Tracy, in terms of like pushing forward on climate, how can we come together more?
That actually nails the answer to the earlier question, was the cost of a climate treaty, because the cost of it's really hard to put a price tag on any particular treaty. And I think Germany, you're a really wonderful example of a leader in the renewables track who can show the benefits and cost analysis over the long haul to transitioning your economy from fossil fuels to renewables. And it's a challenge, and I'm sure you can speak to that more than I can. But the cost of transitioning your economy is one thing, and that's what I think they were trying to capture in the cost of a treaty, which is quite difficult to do. So I'm wondering how they did that, with the indicators or the variables, etc. But that being said, we're at an interesting point historically, and I think that what this touches upon is a cynicism that many may have about the value of a top-down treaty in the first place. And so I think that's more what I would like to address, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Because what we're understanding now is that we need everything. We need bottom-up and we need top-down. I think Copenhagen, before Copenhagen, etc., there was a belief that if we just left it to the governments would figure it all out, we'd have an agreement, and it would all be good, and that would be the end. And when Copenhagen was less than expected, and we could go through a whole other analysis of the fact that expectations were likely too high for that juncture in history and what could have landed in that time and place. But in Copenhagen actually landed us the accord, the framework of a treaty which we are looking at approving basically, or landing in Paris in the end of 2015. So it had a foundation that was quite successful in many ways, although under-recognized. But the long story is that we need both. We need top-down, we need a policy. It's hard won. It's through many negotiations that the first cartoon pointed out. And we need bottom-up. And that's bottom-up at the community level, the subnational level, and the national level. And that's where the cost-benefit analysis is actually done at all those levels. It takes public interest to say, we need an agreement, we care about this issue, we're going to do it no matter what. It takes cities to actually take the action so that the national governments say, the cities are behind me, I can take a more ambitious action if I recognize that my governments and my cities are actually doing X or Y. They're getting rid of Diesel 6 in New York City. Whatever the steps they're taking actually at the national level allows me to be higher in my national ambition. And then at the national level, there's a cost-benefit analysis as well that needs to be undertaken, and it's not just energy, it's all of those other things that are up there. And that's where I think we're maturing as audiences, we're maturing as a politic body, where I think most voters recognize that climate change isn't just climate, it's water, it's food, it's soil, it's health, it's all of these other things. And so I think some of, like, that's a bit, I think that person's a bit outdated. I think increasingly so that gives me hope. Sorry about the political diatribe there.
It was a good one. It was a good one. Georg, I'm going to come over to you, and we're actually going to skip the next video, but I'm hoping in your answer you can both talk a little bit to this idea of you know, how can we improve, how can we grow climate policy, but also this idea of what's the future? What's the future of climate collaboration? What could it look like? Maybe it's something that we haven't seen before. And I'm hoping we can bring up an image that will inspire you. I think it speaks a little bit to, and it's after this. I mean, it's kind of an obvious image that you think of with climate, a hippo on a skateboard, right, being driven by a mouse. That's not what you thought. But something you had said, Georg, was about this importance of fun being in the process. And also, I think we've also touched a little bit, like that little mouse over there is an unexpected leader that we had talked about before. And there's an awful lot of diversity on that little rolly thing. So, Georg, I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to that idea of fun and this future of climate collaboration.
Right. Well, the thing is that we see more and more benefits from doing climate policy. So in the old days, it was like, well, we have to do something. It was very moral, and that drove many people away. And it was like the film pointed out, so many different perspectives that makes common negotiations so difficult, and that makes a treaty so difficult. Because if you look at the States and United States and Europe, they have different perspectives on the same treaty. So it's very hard to do that. But then almost 10 years ago or so, Nicholas Stern calculated that the benefits from climate policy only cost 1/10 of the climate damage, the damage of climate change. So, and that for the first time brought in a new perspective, an economic perspective on the same thing. And nowadays we know that a lot of things are fun, are economic profitable. So, and nowadays, I heard one conclusion just a few weeks ago, and that is a successful economy is only possible with an aggressive climate policy. And that is, I think, the motto for the next years to come, and more people believe that.
And I'm going to come over to you in terms of a question we get a lot in our partnership with Germany is, why on earth is, like, why do Germany and Italy care about climate stuff in the US? And so when we're looking, you had talked about the EU being an interesting example of you both have to work together, but you're kind of competing with each other in some ways. What's this future? Why is this collaboration across the oceans important?
So there are different tools that we're using. So we have our bilateral science and technology agreement, that is a US-European agreement that is trying to boost specific topic areas in research, but also we have the US-Europe Energy Council. There is another area where we can try to leverage specific topic we like to develop on the European level. These are two main tools, but what I would like to underline is that there is a strong interest in identifying specific key technologies that are developed within also the US federal labs. You said it before about and the thing is, there is so much knowledge that is available. So I think the best way to talk, I'm talking about the OE, but could be also other federal agencies, talking directly to the labs. The labs sometimes they are looking too much internally. I mean, they're too much focalized in internal market, let's say. They are willing now to open more internationally, and we have to take this opportunity. The only thing that we identified among our colleagues is that we really should try to have a harmonized approach, as I said. I mean, because we cannot go to knock to the door to different labs with our solutions and after try to work together. It could create some noise and confusion. And the same with the municipalities. So the idea is to have understanding how we operate about the different member states. For sure, there are some member states that are more active and less active, but the idea is really to identify among our initiatives which are the portfolio capability that we can try to bring to the US-Europe dialogue. And there, in particular, the idea is to identify technology we're able to scale up together with our counterpart. I mean, if you're able to identify joint requirements that can be used either in the US, the requirements that are coming from the US and from Europe, and developing together in our, using our national programs, then we can really leverage the result and the implementing component that is somehow missing together.
Yeah. So really taking great examples from these different areas and finding ways to kind of build them together and share them. Is that a little bit?
The idea sometimes is that we have mechanisms and programs that allowed us to fund our initiative locally. And the idea is to try to mirror them with the one that you have in the US. And the idea is really try to let these different program mechanisms of funding talking to each other, even if we are fund our local project. So sometimes this kind of interaction is somehow missing. And so you have a very nice framework of policy, and after you need the people on the field that are able to talk to each other in a more active way, using the tools that are available.
Yeah, did you want to add to that, Tracy?
I would just add, I think that model's being replicated. The idea of collaboration is occurring in so many innovative ways regarding policy on climate change. For example, U.S.-China Working Group on Climate Change. Who would ever guess that U.S. and China would now be working together on technological research on smart grids? That's pretty great. I mean, in many other areas as well. And then we also have, in Africa, there's a lot of collaboration going, including on renewable energy. There's the African Clean Energy Corridor. 22 governments have been, the 2 renewable energy corridors that have been gathered together, and there's been donors pulling together and research institutes to figure out what is the renewable energy capacity of these countries, what is the capacity need, human resource needs, etc., to build up the renewable energy in these countries. And it's true collaboration to ensure that these countries can basically leapfrog fossil fuel development into renewables. So I'm sure, I imagine there might be some donors in the room here. So
raise your hand, please, if you're a donor. So this is great. We're gonna bring everyone up in a minute and just have we're near the end, and you guys are gonna get more drinks and get to talk with each other. But we have I want to thank you guys for being here and to shine a light on policy. Our last amazing performer, a friend and wonderful writer and performer, an artist, James Hanahan, who is going to read some selections of his writing for us. Welcome.
I meant to bring up a prop. I've been reading this. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I'm happy that at least one person thinks that ending our love affair with free market capitalism is one way of dealing with climate change. This is a short piece from a, can anyone see me? I hear these people.
Do well.
No, you're invisible right now.
Is that better?
That is better.
This better? Okay. This is a piece, a sort of prose poem from a group of poems or something. I'm really a novelist. I don't really write poems, but I was writing these things that had to do with global catastrophe. This is a short piece called Other Deaths. 1. Privately, we expect to avoid that other death by dying ourselves. But when the sun swells to several times its current size, or we freeze the Gulf Stream and start the next ice age, we'll die again as catastrophe erases the hatch marks we made in the bark of certain trees. We'd hope to have some lasting effect beyond our individual sayonara, but tough luck. So what then? Is the space program our way of scouring the interstellar real estate section? Bright planet in Crab Nebula. Steps from subway amenities. Once the Gulf is all oil and the oceans mostly plastic, will the haves among us hop a zip spaceship and leave the rest in global urban blight? Have we already flipped the bird at history to make psychic room for the upcoming International Raspberry? 2. When mankind started dating reason, he didn't meet her family for a very long time. Then came that disastrous barbecue when candor told everyone how fat they were. Misinformation insisted on her received ideas. Rationalization explained that nothing can ever go bad in a deep freeze. And authority said grace over burgers chock full of E. coli. But mankind had already fallen in love, and in the throes, you can only hear the sound of your own infatuation, the bloop of the skull becoming impervious to judgment. What a mess. Remember the wedding? 3. In grade school, we laughed at the Stegosaurus for his lack of self-awareness, his unfortunate wardrobe, the walnut-sized brain that has kept him in remedial math since the late Kimmerithian age. But his lack of ambition made him suitable to a universe where, frankly, not much happens outside major cities, and most of what does takes place in a vacuum, silently, airlessly. Not to diss our opposable thumbs, books, medicines, and internets and everything, but with a slower learning curve, Faust might have cheated Mephistopheles. Inadvertently, of course, but it's hard to deny that the cosmos favors animal ignorance, not man's brand of stupidity. Every year, we dredge the beach and build new houses in the sand. Thanks.
We don't do a traditional Q&A at these events because we leave a lot of room for networking at the end, so you guys can keep talking with each other, we hope. So I think this will hopefully help bring us all together, but I want to hear from you. What do you think, if climate collaboration was a recipe that we just really wanted everyone to cook, what would be some ingredients that it would not rise, it would not work at all if they weren't in it? And I think, because there was something very interesting that both of you in our discussions had come out with, and there was something about coming back to the beginning of that individual, of this role of an individual. And Marquise, I don't know if that rings a bell for you. Would you mind starting us off?
Sure. I would go back to what I was saying earlier around this idea of empowerment and really creating the best conditions to be surprised. And regardless of what that person is, a leader doesn't necessarily need to lead from the front, you can lead from the side, you can lead behind. It's about creating access for everyone to be a leader with themselves and make decisions about how they want to live their lives. And that is as simple as the way that you want to eat. The question that you asked us earlier, I answered in what are we willing to give up, when it comes to climate change. And we all have to make that individual decision around what are we willing to give up. And to me, any collaboration has to start with some of those questions as we come as individuals.
Tracy, maybe you had some ideas about what you've seen in terms of, if you want to touch on that.
Yeah. This has been a very rich conversation, and I want to say a million things. this reminds me of a Buddhist tenet that says when you go into a practice, you should always think about what you want to leave behind, not what you want to get out of something. And I think as a culture, we need to practice more of that, I think we don't do well about doing without, but I think leaving behind is maybe a more healthy way of putting it. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said everybody has a leader within them, or everybody has to listen to their own leadershipness, or however you want to word it. But I think with effective collaboration, you can't underestimate the power of an individual or the individual. It does take sort of personalities that step ahead. It takes individuals. It takes guts. It takes courage for people to step ahead of the rest and say, I'm going to take that radical step. I'm going to do something that nobody else is doing. And also to maybe have the personality or the type of gumption that others will actually follow. So, I mean, if you think even, like I mentioned, with the EU, they tend to lead. With Iceland, they tend to lead on gender. I mean, there are certain gender equality in the negotiations. There are certain countries in the negotiations that lead on certain issues. Forcefully, always, they have that reputation, and then the followers fall behind. And I hope in our own lives we identify what we're good at and what we can lead on, and it might be just in our communities, in our homes, and among our friends, etc. But that we take that to heart.
And Georg, what do you think? What's that one ingredient? It just can't happen without it.
One ingredient.
I like to make things difficult.
It's like a good meal, one ingredient. I would say you have one ingredient on every level. I would extremely underline what you said. You need leadership on a political level. You need good examples. You need something which is catching, like city partnerships comes in my mind. People exchange their experiences, and then next year they just start to do what another city did successfully. You know, just do it, and that happens in many ways. So examples are very important. Successful examples and leadership, I would say as well. I got two.
Sure. What do you think? What's that ingredient?
I think that it's a critical understanding of the scope and the immediacy of the problem. That is, that climate change is here, that communities are being impacted right now, and that everyone can identify collectively the root of the problem, that it's fossil fuels, that it's carbon, that it's a problem that needs to be organized around, and that people can, whatever avenue they go down to contribute, can build power around it and exert some agency.
Sabina?
All right, so my biggest message is usually there's no one single item that can actually solve our problems. But if I had to pick one, if you force me to pick one, I think everybody has talked about the power of the individual, but the individual, I would like to take the individual out of its isolation. We all act within a social context, and social context means interpersonal uncertainty. We don't know what the other one will do. So US will only participate if China participates. What we don't know if China participates. So in a way, but China does the same thing. So taking out the interpersonal uncertainty through a process where we share what our goals are, what our long-term and short-term goals are, and can see if they can be aligned. And if I then can trust the other collaborator, collaboration may actually turn into cooperation.
I think that's the key word, that is trust. I mean, the problem is really to start to know each other better and have this link that allows you to start to build a relationship. And that is, I think, the very, very big obstacle that you have. I think to have it more powerful, the idea is to have different stakeholders understanding this kind of common needs that you're willing to bring on the table. And sometimes to build a coalition of willing is not really easy. So I think the key issue is really to identify which are the key elements in terms of knowledge you like to put on the table, and on that one build real trust and willing to push forward. I think the other elements that came from the experience that I had in this last month is also that you have to find an economic interest behind it. I mean, there is an economic reason in order to push all different stakeholders to invest in this kind of challenge that you put on the table. So that is important. So you have to find the right proposition in order to have all the different layers of collaborator working together. So the policy is one, the city that could be on the bottom is at a lower level could be involved, the researchers, the industries. I mean, there should be all this kind of interconnection about different stakeholders.
Great, and so now we're talking about trust, individual, coming together, different stakeholders. So I want to challenge you, and I hope this can be maybe a part of the conversation we all have, is what climate collaboration can we create today, right now? What can we do on the stage? We know a little bit more about each other. Is someone willing to go out on that? Will someone be the crazy dancer? It's always me, so I need someone else to do it. I will be second. What do you think? What can we do today?
I think that we have such a diverse group here, and I can see also the differences, which I love. And what I always say is it's never about agreement, it's about alignment. And one thing that I do love on this stage and in here, that we are aligned around, and there could be a lot of disagreements, but I believe that we're all aligned. And if we could walk away today really understanding how this alignment can continue on and what we can build on with each other and sharing, whether it's, again, connecting with each other, whether it's online, offline, and starting to build on some of the ideas that we have. I believe that the alignment will become even stronger, and it will spread out. We'll start to create this contagious movement that bounces off of all of our organizations that began here.
Anyone else want to take a risk? If not, it's okay, we can open it up. Tracy?
I'm just inspired by the art and the poetry and whatnot. And I think that, I think it was you that was mentioning about access earlier. I don't know if anyone saw for the summit, we had a civil society representative who was nominated globally, and she, Kathy Jetnell Kitchener, she was a slam poet from the Marshall Islands, and she received as many hits on social media as Leo DiCaprio, and pretty phenomenal. I think there is something there. I'm just mentioning that as an anecdote for the fact that that was accessible more than Obama's speech even, President Obama's speech. So if there's some way of capitalizing on the fact that we have amazing artists here and somehow spreading that, I think that would be really nice and reminding people to be inspired.
Wonderful. And as an organization whose mission is really to find out how to inspire people to take action, certainly believe in that. And I was certainly inspired tonight. And we want to leave, we always like to leave on I think this is a very positive note, but on a little fun note as usual, and this will hopefully get you into the mood of, again, how we started. We're coming full circle. Hopefully we can bring it up. This is a little thought-provoking piece of something maybe you can do.
What do I want? Change! When do I want it? Now! What do I want? Change! When do I want it? Now! We stand together as one, literally as one person, for change.